y'all, editing me here to welcome you to this video. If you haven't seen the first part or parts of this series, I recommend you go check them out. They will be linked in the video description, and eventually I'm going to be doing a big kind of all-in-one 4 or 5 hour big boy compilation video of all these videos in one go, kind of as they're supposed to be seen. But if you're watching in parts, like I say, it'd be a good idea if you check out the first part or parts first. I'll be releasing each new part going over a different book over the next couple of days, weeks, that sort of thing, so it'd be great if you want to check that out before you watch this. But for now, thank you. I'll let you get back to this video. It's way better than this, and I'm far more put together than I am now, kind of. Book 4 is titled The Ringmaster, and I'll start off by saying this book was a lot better than the others in a lot of ways, but that doesn't make it good. There was a lot less overt abuse from Simon, and if his behaviour had only ever been what it is in this book, then I'd say it was questionable, but not enough to make a whole however many long hour video this is. What we see in this book is thankfully a lot less physical violence and a lot less sexual assault. There's no more attempted rape, very little touching without consent from Simon, but what we do see a lot of is premeditated emotional manipulation and control, which is absolutely a form of emotional abuse and a very serious one, and one that I think we as a society overlook far too much and need to be more aware of recognising and calling out when we see it. There is also a direct comparison between the way that Simon and Cora interact and another abusive relationship, but we'll speak more about that at the end of this section. I think it's all handled very badly, but we will discuss it when we get to it. That said, there was thankfully a lot more actual plot in this book, which was good, and there were also a lot more interactions with side characters and us learning about their backstories and their thoughts and feelings a lot more, and I thoroughly enjoyed these parts of the book. But let's start at the beginning. So this book doesn't start too badly. Cora's passed out because she is having more visions and communicating directly with the sentient fairground. It's filling her in on its history and, spoilers, telling her that the fair is actually dying and that it needs her to save it. Meanwhile, Simon is actually quite worried about her at this point because she won't wake up, and that's quite nice to see, I guess. He actually goes and asks Aaron to help wake her up, and that's new for him. That's actually a little bit of character development. I'll take it. I mean, he's still doing the bare minimum, but, you know, I can't overly criticise it. When she does wake up, Cora does this whole little thing of finally admitting to herself that, oh my god, she's like totally in love with Simon, even though he can never love her back. Oh, it's such a tragedy. She loves him, he'll never love her. What will they do? It's not that he doesn't want to love her, he's just physically incapable of it. It's, oh god, just like dating a narcissistic abuser, isn't it? I think they're incapable of real love. You know, you go through it and you kid yourself that like, oh, if you just love them more, if you just treat them better, then one day maybe they'll change. Maybe they'll actually be able to love you. But the truth is, they can't and they never will. Honestly, it's a horrible situation to be in. It's draining and scary and miserable, and even when they say they love you, they don't really. It's one of the worst feelings ever, so I do relate to Cora here. I do really, really feel for her, and I know exactly what she's going through. But it's really sad to see that she blames herself for it, you know? She basked in the comfort of his nearness. It felt good. It felt nice. It felt like home. I really do love him. Damn it. Typical me. Falling for a guy who couldn't love her back. Literally couldn't. If he did, he might shatter. Great. Awesome. I'm a genius. Like, I really thought I loved my abuser too. And in moments I thought he might be capable of loving me back. I hoped he was, and sometimes he told me that he did, but it was never real. Like, that man is incapable of real love. I don't think he knows what it is. He's capable of pretending to love and saying all the right things and acting the right way in certain moments, but I don't think he's ever really loved anyone, and I don't think he ever will or ever can. And once you realise that, and realise that you deserve more, it does make it easier for you to leave and get to safety. But that hurts. It really, really hurts. So I do get how Cora's feeling here, but it just made me want to scream at her even more that she should be leaving and trying to get out of there. We also see Simon starting to ramp up his jealousy even more. Jealousy towards lots of things, really. One, the sentient fair taking up some of Cora's time and attention and taking it away from him. And two, jealousy of Cora having more power than him. Again, typical narcissistic abuser behaviour there. Again, this is just like my abuser who would often get angry at the fact that I was more intelligent than him, more successful than him, earned more money than him, despite being a lot younger, all that stuff. They were like, sometimes we'd be having a conversation with his parents over dinner, and if he was incorrect about something, then I'd like correct him in the nicest possible way, as you do, right? Like, there were statements that he'd make that were just like blatantly untrue about, you know, things that I knew about, like biology or sociology or whatever, and, you know, stuff that I'd like studied at uni or that I'd been reading papers on recently for a video or stuff like that. And, you know, if I dared to like tell him about a study that corrected something he was talking about, or I told him like, oh no, actually those cells work like this or something like that, then, you know, I'd pay for it later. It was awful. It wasn't a fun way to live. Whereas in comparison, my partner now, he's pretty amazing. I love him because he never pretends to know more about something than he does, but he feels very much my equal with everything, which is nice. He's very happy to listen to me talk at length about whatever I'm interested about at the time, and in return he teaches me about things that he knows about, and he tells me about all sorts of stuff, and I feel like we're very equally matched, which is lovely. I've never felt intimidated by him. I don't think he feels that way about me. There's never any jealousy or anything, and he always 100% celebrates my achievements. He's very supportive. It's very healthy. It's wonderful. Unlike my abuser, and unlike Simon in the story, who repeatedly says terrifying things like, I don't like sharing, he sneered, and I'm jealous of the power you have. Like, it's not subtle. It's really not subtle. And yet somehow people still romanticize this. We see this repeated so much throughout the entire book, just a couple of pages later. And why give that link to Cora of all people, he grimaced. He wanted that power for himself. He should be the one to drain the gift of satiety. Who knew what other benefits came with it? I don't know about you, but if my partner asked why a responsibility had been given to me of all people, I would be so disgusted that they thought so little of me and likely immediately dump them. Even when his shadow self tries to check in on Cora, because we know like they've started communicating with each other directly now and stuff. Shadow and Simon, I mean. And Shadow and Cora, all the things. Anyway, basically Simon gets jealous of himself. It's ridiculous. I just like sharing you, as I said. Even with myself, I am a jealous and wrathful creature, and you belong to me. He is simply more irritating because I don't have the means to hurt him, nor shut him up. This is not healthy or normal or something we should be romanticizing. He even like goads her into saying whatever he wants her to. Like, she couldn't tell him that she loved him, but she could give him what he wanted, even if it was a little embarrassing. It was the truth. I belong to you, puppeteer, because I love you. And then he literally goes on to think he had goaded the admission out of her. He had poked and prodded until she had finally admitted the truth to him. Not healthy. Really, really not healthy. Just not okay. Later, Cora communicates with the Fair itself in a dream, and it shows her part of what Simon is dreaming of, and in this dream he's arguing with himself, the shadow of himself, and it is revealing. You know, there's like the thing about how people really reveal their true selves when they're drunk and in private. He thinks he's completely alone and in private, so you know, we can trust what he's saying, that he really means it. In his dream, he calls Cora nothing but a, and I quote, temporary dalliance, and gets jealous of the shadow again. He possibly accurately points out that Cora probably doesn't actually love him, and is just confusing her feelings of lust with love, which honestly is plausible, and I wish was the case. And then he says, who would love us? Who? No one in their right minds. Kind of has a point, I guess. Therefore, she is either a drooling moron or a psychotic in her own right. And she is neither. This is a temporary state. It will pass in time. All things pass in time. The book tries so hard then to convince us that, like, no, it's real love, honest, and Simon's only saying this because he's, like, totally afraid of his true feelings, but, I get it, you know, like, hurt people, push people away sometimes. Simon clearly has this anxious, avoidant attachment style, which is why he is so keen to push her away one minute and then get controlling and jealous about her possibly leaving him for someone else the next. It's why he acts so jealous. I know what that's like. I had struggled with that attachment style myself a lot. It's taken a lot of work in therapy to work through that and understand what it means to build a secure attachment with someone. And it's not that people with these issues, with these attachment styles, aren't deserving of love at all. It's just that to get past something like that, you have to acknowledge that it's something you struggle with and put a lot of work in yourself, and also have a supportive partner who understands your behaviour and motivations and will help you work through it. That's important too. You can't get over issues with attachment styles completely by yourself, obviously. But it's different because none of this happens in the book. Instead, it takes the really unhealthy approach of, oh, this is just who Simon is. This is who he's always been. This is who he always will be. And therefore, instead of him working to get over his trauma and working alongside Cora on any of this, they go with the option of Cora just needs to suck this up because she loves him, deal with him because she loves him. And therefore, she has to keep dealing with him just pushing her away and being angry and violent and possessive and saying all these horrible things about her because, like, that's totally romantic. That's what love is, right? No, it's not. It's not romantic. It's not love. Accepting your partner for the way they are and the flaws they have means things like loving someone who does things differently to you. Accepting that maybe you guys have to cook different meals a couple of nights a week because you like different things. Or understanding that if they have a health problem, you might need to support them through that sometimes. That's what it means to accept a partner and their flaws, and love them because of their flaws. It's not suck it up while they physically abuse you and emotionally abuse you and make you feel like crap all the time because it's something, love and whatever. He then screams at his shadow, the worst bit, which is, rage filled him like an old friend. You are nothing more than a petulant child. That is how the shadow is written, to be fair, which is why it's creepy as hell Cora has sex with him. Anyway. You are nothing more than a petulant child. I would turn her into one of my puppets before I let myself love her. I would see her maimed and mauled before I lowered myself to such a degrading position. She is less irritating to have around than any of the other family. I enjoy fucking her. Having her there to warm my bed and wet my cock is all I will ever want from her. I am Simon the Puppeteer. I do not love Cora Glass, and I never will. Obviously not realising that Cora heard this, but hey, at least he's honest, right? Cora responds with silence and tears and tries to leave, and she wakes up back in the real world and she acknowledges that it had been a long, long time since she'd been this heartbroken. Simon then realizes that she's heard everything, and he's like, oh crap, and tries to wake up too. Cora, bless her though, like any victim of this kind of abuse, she blames herself. She wanted to slap him, hit him, beat him senseless, but it was a selfish need. This wasn't his fault. Not really. He'd never pretended to be anything other than what he is. He's always been honest with me. I'm to blame for this. This is my mistake. This is just like when Johnny used to throw stuff at me and then blame me. I made him throw it. I made him angry. I made him break stuff. This was my fault. Or when I'd catch him messaging sexual things to other people, and it was my fault for finding out. I was the one who shouldn't have seen the messages, not him for sending them, you know? Or like when other people like message me to tell me about what he'd done, my fault for opening and reading those messages from people and listening to them, not his fault for having betrayed me and lied to me and cheated on me. My fault. This is what these kinds of abusers do. So yeah, I feel very, very sorry for Cora's character here. And again, it's very clear to me that this isn't romantic. This is a woman living in an abusive relationship. I don't get why people are like, oh my god, they're so adorable together, I love them. I mean, I think Cora has every right here to be upset with a man who just described her as only ever being someone to, and I quote, warm his bed and wet his cock. Like, I'm sorry, but no one deserves to be spoken about with such disrespect. I think it's disgusting. And even people who only have casual sexual relationships with people, even they should be speaking about each other with more respect than this. It's disgusting. It's dehumanizing, it's degrading, it's abusive. Cora's obviously very upset, do not blame her, and she tries to wake him up, and he responds by snapping awake, and he rounded on her, slamming her against the wood wall so hard her vision flashed white. His hand was around her throat and she couldn't breathe. She could only splutter and claw at his wrist and try to pull him away. His face was a mask of rage. Those black red eyes looked at her with no recognition, only hatred. Again, this is not okay. This is not romantic. This should not be a natural reaction to your partner waking you up. Cora scrambles away and she felt betrayed. She felt small, weak, alone, and afraid, which is exactly how abusers do make you feel. This is normal. If your partner regularly makes you feel like this, leave them. This is not something you should have to put up with. This is not a way you or anyone should be made to feel. And then I think one of the scariest, most familiar lines for me was, she didn't even realize she was crying. It happens so frequently now, she supposed she was getting used to it. And familiar, but it shouldn't be the case. Fear, crying, feeling alone, these are not things you should just be used to. in a relationship. It surprised me, like, how different it is being in a healthy relationship to what I felt was normal when I was with Johnny. Even little things. Like, Kyra's a big indicator for me for how much happier and healthier things are now. So Kyra has an issue with when she's stressed and anxious, she throws up. So things like when I've had to leave to go away for a bit, sometimes she's thrown up out of anxiety because she wasn't sure she was going to see me again or stuff like that. And it got to the point with Johnny where pretty much every time we stayed at his, or every time he would come over here, she would end up puking her guts out the next morning because it was an anxiety thing. And for a while she was terrified of men. And every time I had a man in my flat, even when it was just like a friend or a maintenance guy or something like that, she would end up puking a lot. And it was just pure anxiety and stuff. And so I was kind of like, I guess, used to this and aware of it and stuff. And when I first met my partner now, I said to him, I was like, Kyra sometimes gets nervous around men and she might throw up if she's anxious. Just, I guess, beware of it. And so I expected her to throw up the first time we stayed over here or the first time we stayed over at his, and there's been absolutely nothing. She hasn't done it once. She's been such an amazing, wonderful, brave little girl. And it's made me realise just how much safer both me and her feel now compared to what we were at, and how everything was so turbulent and terrifying, and it was like arguments every time we were together, and even if I tried to do everything right, he would find a reason to be mad at me and angry and scream at me, and it's nice to not have that, but it is terrifying to look back and see how normal that became. And how I felt like I just had to put up with it. It gets worse and more sad when she says things like, truthfully, she was mad at herself more than at Simon. She was a fool for letting herself get sucked into believing this might mean something to him. No, she's not a fool. It's not her fault. She's not to blame. She can't be blamed for his awful behaviour and him saying horrible things. She's not a fool. She was a vulnerable person that he took advantage of and knew exactly what he was doing, because that's what abusers do. That's what they always do. Cora storms off for a while, talks to the fair again, Simon comes to find her, and he's angry that she doesn't want to talk to him, even though I think that's completely reasonable and understandable, and he refuses to apologise for what he said, like straight up, doesn't deny that he meant it, and when he asks if this means that they're breaking up, Cora asks if that's what he wants, and he says, no, yes, I don't know, and punches a tree. At this point, I was literally internally screaming for Cora to leave him, like, he's giving you an out. Please, please, please take it. But she doesn't, which is very frustrating. He hits a few more things, he's bleeding, and then he begs her not to go, because he only said what he wished was true. He doesn't want to care about her, but maybe he does, and it's killing him. And Cora realizes that she can't possibly abandon him like this. Again, pure emotional manipulation from Simon, and it's so difficult to read. The next morning she wakes up and she finds Simon just cooking in her trailer like nothing ever happened, and she straight up asks him to apologise for the stuff that he said, and he just won't. He just doesn't. All he can say is, you weren't meant to find out, which again, oh my god, just like Johnny. Got caught cheating. You weren't meant to know, you weren't meant to see, you weren't meant to find out, you weren't meant to be taught. Like, typical abuser. They're never sorry for what they've done, they're only ever sorry for being caught. So Cora's been told she needs to go and speak to Mr. Harrow, as in the man in the boxcar that no one ever speaks to, that no one ever like communicates to. She needs to go and like speak to him, and yeah, pretty big point to the plot, pretty big thing. Okay, and again, Simon's super jealous. He's like, where would he speak to you? Where was his gift given to you? Blah blah blah. He can't deal with a powerful woman because he's a weak little man, which all abusers are. Not all abusers are men, but they're weak. You know what I'm trying to say. And then Cora tells him something that the fair told her when they were communicating, and this is basically that if the fair hadn't taken Simon when it did, then within a few years he would have cruelly murdered his wife and children and painted a picture with their blood, which would have created a literal cult following, by which I mean an actual cult of people who would go around murdering and sacrificing people. So if you're in any doubt about how awful Simon was, then there you go. He's not mean because he ripped out a bit of his sadness. He is an inherently awful, psychotic, murdering, violent, abusive person. It's just who he is. Now, I think with most people, if you told them that they would be directly responsible for the murders of their family and indirectly responsible for the murders of literally hundreds of other people, most people would be horrified. But not Simon. His response is, oh, that is glorious! I would have achieved my goal of being a world-famous painter after all. How wonderful! It's hysterical. I have no difficulty picturing myself draining their bodies of blood to fulfill my true purpose. Absolute psychopath. Right, Coop? Yes. And then he slams Cora down on the table and uses his puppet strings to control her, telling her, I have some frustrations to vent. Each time she squirmed or writhed, he tightened his strings and added more until she could barely move. And then he shoves his penis inside her, which is how I think all sane people react to being told they would have murdered their family, right? How romantic. Please remember that this is the character that reviewers have described as, I adore Simon. He's such a fantastic character. And his relationship with Cora is adorable on so many levels. No, please stop, get help. Later, Simon asks Cora, you aren't afraid that I might stab you in the back just to obtain this power Clown bestowed on you? I am, but what? Are you holding on to the hope that I might come to my senses in the last moment? He scoffed. No. Walking away from him towards the door, she slipped on her sandals. Because I know who you are. I know you're dangerous. But I also know that... She paused and shook her head. It was so hard to put into words. I don't know. Don't you love me, Cora? She hesitated and stared down at her feet. Taking in a slow breath, she held it, and on the exhale, ripped off the bandage. Yes! Silence. Hurt stabbed her, but she understood. I know you can't. I know you won't. I know you don't want to. I knew that even if you could love me, you wouldn't. It's all right. I get it. You've never lied about exactly who you are and what you are. This is my fault, not yours. He was studying her with such a look of evil glee that it made her shrink back towards the door. Simon? In an instant, he was across the room and had her pressed against the door. She squeaked as he grabbed her shoulders. Say it. Say the whole thing, beginning to end. You're being stupid. You just want to rub it in and embarrass me. No. She tried to shove him away, but he planted her right back where she was against the wall. Say it. No. Say it. No. I'll make you. I love you, Simon. Wait. One of these days, she was going to learn to not try to predict what Simon was going to do next. Because he laughed. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't mean, it wasn't derisive, but it still wasn't the response she was expecting, or hoping for. But her hopes were as good as dust at this point in her life. He cackled like he had just heard the funniest joke in the world, and even had to wipe at his eyes underneath his sunglasses. This whole interaction is horrifying. For one thing, the whole worrying about his betraying her to steal her powers thing, totally valid, because as you see throughout the rest of the book, that is exactly what he is planning to do and trying to come up with a plan to do. Her blaming herself for him being an awful person without feelings, absolutely heartbreaking, and Cora, not her fault at all, it's his. Him forcing her to say she loves him and then literally laughing at her is repulsive and reminded me of this clip from a Paul and Morgan video I made, and my own experience, like last week, 2 weeks, I don't know when it was now. Time has just been taken up by this video. Time doesn't exist outside this video for me anymore. I told Paul that I loved him first. You know what he said? I think I feel the same way too, but I'm not totally sure. Stop right now. Let me tell you what, I did not prepare my heart for that response. So the crash landing I talked about with you guys, yeah, I had one of those. I crashed right into a bed of rocks, and my little wings were shattered, for about an hour. He then apologised and was like, I don't know why I said that, I do love you, I know I love you, I'm sorry. And now all of a sudden my wings were healed, and I was flying off to Loveland with my man. Lol. This reminds me a lot of Johnny, and I've spoken before about the abusive relationship I was in. He was physically and emotionally abusive, but there was this one moment, no, it wasn't even a moment, it was a whole thing, it was a whole drama. He literally had me in tears after I told him I loved him for the first time, and not happy tears, because he refused to say it back, and he got really mean, and he got angry, and he pushed me away, and he was like, he accused me of using saying I loved him as a way to manipulate him. And he got angry and he started a big argument and he threw things around like he always did. And then a few hours later he came back and was like, no, I do love you, Rachie, I do, of course I love you. And after that he kind of used love as almost like a bargaining tool, but I was always walking on eggshells with him. I never really knew where I actually stood. And he was always swinging backwards and forwards on his feelings, and it was like he was playing with me, he was playing games with me constantly. And I still don't think he ever really loved me at all. I think it was all fake. Again, I think he was just using it as like a manipulation tool. And, you know, he'd be like, oh, like, you know, you're lucky that I love you. No one else will want you. No one else will love you. Only I love you. You know, that sort of thing. And 1 hour, I'd be like the love of his life, and he'd never met anyone like me, and I was the best person he knew. And then the next, I'd be like an effing rat and a stupid bitch, and he was telling me he was going to kill me. And it was always, you know, swinging backwards and forwards. It was weird. Like, the love bombing stages made me feel so special and loved. And then in the bad stages, he'd tell me that no one else would ever want me, and that all of the issues in our relationship were my fault and mine to deal with and fix and change. And when you constantly hear it, you start to believe it. Later, he even asks his own shadow, doesn't it strike you the least bit funny that she, who was so very afraid of me not a few weeks ago, is now in love with me? After everything I've done? Yeah. It's funny, it's messed up, I'm asking that question too, but how the hell do people romanticize this? So they end up going to dinner with everyone else in the fair. She hasn't spoken to anyone but Simon and the fair itself since the whole clown dying thing. So everyone is concerned, lots of questions, lots of people checking on her and making sure she's okay and stuff like that. And she decides to not tell everyone about the powers she has, and concludes that she really, really, really needs to speak to Mr. Harrow as soon as possible. So she asks Simon to create a distraction so she can sneak away. Usually you'd assume a distraction means, start an interesting conversation, maybe even start an argument, pretend to faint, spill some food, you know, usual stuff. But Simon, being Simon, decides to painfully and immediately kill everyone in the room. But it's okay, remember? They don't die permanently, so it's not like their suffering actually matters. Seriously, anyone whose first reaction to anything is physical violence is not someone we should be looking up to or romanticizing at all. The book even tries to say, she could try to excuse it, claim it was fine because they'd all healed, but torture was torture, pain was pain, and pleasure at someone else's suffering was always going to be that. And the look on Simon's face, there was no question he was having an absolute blast. And of course, Cora, being a typical victim of abuse, blames herself for his behaviour, blames herself for what he did. It was all her fault. I did this, I'm responsible for this, they're all dead and dying and it's my fault. I told him to do it. Her hands were shaking. She felt sick to her stomach. What was wrong with her? What was this place turning her into? How could she love someone capable of that kind of violence? It's not like she hadn't known before. Simon was a violent monster. He was a sociopathic, psychopathic killer. He had been since the day she met him. She knew this was who he was. She knew, and she loved him anyway. It made her a terrible person, a horrible person. This stuff is heartbreaking to read because, oh, God bless her, it's not her fault. Simon, meanwhile, it's full-on gloat fest. Simon sat on the side lip of the upturned picnic bench and surveyed his handiwork. Oh, it truly was a work of art. It seems I've always been destined to paint with blood. It truly was a scene of gory rampage. He was quite pleased with himself. He hadn't ever managed to murder everyone all at once before. And of course, he also blames Cora for his own actions. The girl had been the one to incite it. She'd asked for a distraction after all. What did she expect? Anyway, Cora goes and finds there is no actual Mr. Harrow. He doesn't exist. It's just an empty trailer. The fair just uses that trailer as kind of like a base to feel closer to everyone, like it's part of the family. And she opens the door and she's sucked into this void where she learns all about the history of the fair again. It used to travel around, and it only used to take teeny tiny bits of people's satiety from them, and fair members used to be free to roam where they wanted and all that good stuff. And then the fair also tells her how Clown used to hold all of the fair's power himself, kind of like the key to it, in control and stuff like that. It's kind of like in two parts. One part is the bit that can take the life out of people and all that stuff, and they're the powers that Cora has now. And the other part is the part that controls stuff, like where the fair goes and all of that. And I'm oversimplifying, but it's all you need for this video, really. Clown was tired, wanted to pass on his powers to Ringmaster, who goes by the name of Turk, because he can't remember his real name and tried to do so. So Clown gives Ringmaster his literal key to the fair's heart, and gives him that power to control it, but the Ringmaster refused to take the other power, the bit that dealt with all the souls and stuff like that. And the Ringmaster decided that the fair was thoroughly evil and needed to be stopped. So he locks the fair into one location, it can't travel anymore. He traps the people in the fair from going anywhere and travelling and doing anything and all that sort of thing. He lets it feed off people just a little teeny tiny bit, but only when they explicitly give up a bit of their satiety, like Cora did when she was given the choice entering the fairground the first time. But now the fair is dying and wants Cora to save it by killing the ringmaster and freeing the circus and taking all the power for herself and allowing it to travel around and give the members more freedom and all that sort of thing. It's a tough decision. There's no clear right or wrong here. The fair does feed off bits of people's souls. Cora likes to call it a man-eating murder circus. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. Then again, you know, it makes the point of like, humans eat animals eat animals, all these things happen, and feeding off little bits of satiety at a time don't really harm anyone in big ways, so is it okay? It's not clear cut, there's no black or white. I like it, you know? So Cora obviously is trying to like figure out what to do, and again, it comes back to this kind of being a little bit like the trolley problem. Does she kill the fair and everyone in it to save humankind, or does she sacrifice tiny little bits of humankind to save the fair and everyone in it? Interesting dilemma. As a part of trying to figure out what to do, she gets way closer to the other members of the fair, tries to get to know them, try to figure out what they want without just overtly asking them if saving them is worth it and stuff like that. She's also like, oh, I don't know about killing Ringmaster, that's tough, I don't think I'm a murderer. She's like, I've never intentionally killed anyone before, don't think it's in me to do that. Meanwhile, Ringmaster has like a pretty good idea of what's happening. He's willing to give Cora some time to think about it and figure out what she wants to do. There's also a time limit on all of this because the fair is super close to death now and it's really, really weak. And okay, that's about all you need to know in the main plot. Let's move forward. When Cora comes back from the void and speaking to the fair, she finds Simon being tortured by the others for killing them. And I get it. Normally I wouldn't support torture, but in this case, I can let it slip because screw Simon. And Cora's like, oh no, free him please, and then later she decides to tell him absolutely everything that the fair told her, and while she's mid-panic and in need of some like desperate support, he just laughs in her face and is like, this is gonna be fun, and he then throws her down on the bed, pins her down, she shouts at him to get off, he won't, she tells him again, get off, he won't, he demands she kill Ringmaster and tells her he won't let her go from being pinned down, and I quote, until you agree that this is the appropriate course of action. Oh, isn't it lovely? Using physical violence to get what you want. Couple goals. Again. It's not romantic. He then tells her his plan, and it's all about him and what he wants, and him trying to get power and control. Nothing about her wants or needs or what she can do or anything like that. Simon only ever thinks about Simon. You kill him and we take over. You take over. But really it'll be me. And then of course he tries a little emotional manipulation to get what he wants. He raised one hand to stroke across her cheek. I would like to think you have some small reason to protect this life you have. She shut her eyes to avoid his stare. She lowered her head. I don't want to hurt you, Simon, I don't. Condemning me to a slow death is fairly painful. Don't guilt me into this. She struggled until he let her go, and she scooted off the bed to walk across the boxcar. Cora ends up in floods of tears and says she doesn't know what to do and she doesn't think she's capable of murder, and Simon's response is, I know, Clown should have given this power to me. No compassion, no empathy, no nothing. This man thinks about no one but himself. Cora asks him, if you were given the option to kill me and take this link to the fair from me, would you do it? Would you kill me to spare yourself? And his response is, that depends entirely on your decision. I do not wish to die, Cora. I do not wish to die very vehemently, and if I must protect my life by destroying yours... He sighed, red eyes flicked to hers. I wouldn't enjoy it. If that's any consolation. It's not, mate, it's really not. And when she's upset, he tells her, don't blame me because you didn't like my answer. The lack of empathy of this man. He is so damn selfish. How do people call this a cute couple? Cora goes to get some rest and he starts plotting again. Cora was a lonely thing. She'd lost her life, her friends, her family, everyone. And if he wasn't enough to convince her that murdering Ringmaster was the right choice, then perhaps ensuring she had a new family was the next best thing. Step 1. Convince Cora to murder Ringmaster and take over the fair. Step 2. Take over the fair from Cora. Ah yes, that hallmark of all good relationships. When you see your partner struggling with something, think, how can I exploit this vulnerability? It's sickening. So as his part of the plan, he pushes her to get to know everyone else at the fair a lot more, which is ironic considering he spent the last 3 books obsessively following her around and stalking her and not letting her be alone for any amount of time and watching her constantly even when she didn't realise it, and putting down every other single person who tried to be her friend and literally killing other men for talking to her. Oh, but it's different now, he can get something out of it, right? Thing is, Cora recognises this as manipulation and just accepts it. That's precisely why you need to spend time with the others. You need to see the value of this life, of us, since I'm not enough to convince you, since your love for me is not enough. She cringed. Simon, I understand. Love is such a weak emotion after all, he sneered. Please stop. She shut her eyes. You're asking me to kill a man for you. This isn't fair. So at least she recognises that, which is a good thing. He also tells her that he plans to take her power from her, and she thinks, he wasn't mad at Simon for wanting to take the power from her. Of course he did. It was Simon. She wasn't surprised, and she certainly didn't hold it against him. Better chance of getting regret out of a wolf for eating a rabbit. You're a wolf. No, she was upset and afraid. Not because she wanted to keep that link. Not because the idea of Simon in charge of the fair was a terrible mental image, but because she was pretty sure she knew how he would take it from her. By killing her. To take the link to the fair away, she would have to die by his hand. And I'm afraid he'll do it. I mean, he's already tried to kill you twice. What's the 3rd time when you're in love, right? Right? Thank you. I love you. When Bertha asks Cora later in the day how she is and how things are going with Simon, her response is to say and think, yeah, I promise he's not that bad. He might just be plotting to kill me. And at this point, I think it's appropriate to read you another review of this book from another young lady. I love seeing Cora and Simon together. Their craziness/twistedness seems to balance each other out. This is what I've been missing in all my relationships, this balance, you know? She's afraid he's going to kill her, and he wants to kill her. The perfect balance. And there are some really nice moments of her actually exploring the fair more and getting to know the others, practicing her act a little bit more, her opening up to some of the others, talking through some of her predicaments with them, and I like this stuff. I want more of this stuff. Less Simon, more magic, more interesting characters, and more tiger moose, please. And then there's a scene where she talks to the fair and it tells her that every person who was chosen to be part of the fair was chosen because it stopped them from doing something to harm people in the real world. So Simon, we already know, would have killed his family and then gone on to like basically inspire and form a cult. It gives the other example of Jack, who would have accidentally burnt down an asylum that he'd in the future have been committed to. And then it tells Cora that she herself would have killed someone and then taken her own life. So it's trying to prove to her that she does have the ability to take another life in the right circumstances. And then Cora wakes up from the dream and finds that the fair has come out of the inversion and is back in the real world. And even though it's only been about 2 weeks in inversion time, it's been about 6 years or so in the real world. This whole fair time thing really doesn't make sense to me. Basically, the premise is time passes quicker outside in the real world than it does in the inversion. But when they tell people their ages, they tell it in real world time and say they've been with the fair however many years in real world time. So like, if 2 weeks in the inversion is like 6 years in real life, Simon was apparently 31 when he joined the fair, and 130 of our years have passed since then. So he's like, yeah, I'm 160 years old. But then convert the whole 2 weeks, 6 years thing. 6 years from there. Let's say he's been with the fair in the inversion for like, okay, if it was in the inversion the whole time, it would probably be closer to like a year, but they weren't in the inversion the whole time, they were out of it. So I would say at most he's probably been with the fair like 5 years. I don't get how this time thing works. It makes no sense. I don't think the author thought this through. As they wake up back in the real world out of the inversion, Simon takes one last opportunity to try and manipulate Cora into doing exactly what he wants. She enters Simon's tent to find that he is tortured and killed and pulled apart all of his sentient puppets, which contained the souls of real people, and they could feel like real people. And as we learned earlier, they could feel pain. And he absolutely could not care less about having killed them. And it turns out he literally did it to manipulate her. He did it on purpose because he wanted something from Cora. He actually killed human people who aren't coming back because he thought it would make her feel bad enough to give him what he wants. You killed them all? Mm-hmm. Why, Simon? I'm gonna die in a week's time. I will meet the void. I no longer need them. It seems like the humane thing to do. He paused, and a slow grin spread over his features. I was also very angry. She chewed her lip and winced. That was a punch to the gut. She almost physically felt it. If I thought perhaps you might listen to reason, if you honestly loved me as you say you do, I would have kept them for the coming war. This is textbook manipulation. If you really love me, if you honestly love me, you do what I want. No. No. I wouldn't have killed these people if you loved me more. I only killed them because you don't love me enough. It's manipulative, it's horrible, it's cruel, it's abusive. This is not romantic, and it should not be glamorized in the way that it is. Cora then opens up to him about how she's actually scared of herself and what she might do, what it will mean if she goes ahead and actually kills the Ringmaster, a man that she did consider starting to become a friend, a man who has been nothing but nice to her, and a man who tried to protect her, and a man who honestly is just trying to help humanity as a whole. Cora admitted her deepest feelings. She's upset, she's vulnerable, and Simon once again responds by just laughing in her face. It's cruel. I'm afraid of the monster I think I am, or what I'll be if I agree to kill Ringmaster. He furrowed his brow. Then he laughed. He sat back on his heels and cackled in laughter. It really was the funniest thing he'd heard in a very, very long time. It isn't funny, Cora glared at him. That only made it worse. He laughed harder, wiping his sleeve across his eyes. She was glowering at him with such a ferocious hatred that he couldn't have stifled his amusement, even if he'd tried. He had to hold on to the bench behind him to keep from falling over. Now, I know this isn't as bad as the violence and the rape and attempted murders and all of that stuff, but it's still horrible. And all these things like him laughing at her, opening up to him and stuff like that, it all adds up to him just being an abusive partner. It's horrible. Horrible. Anyway, so the fair comes to life again. Visitors come back. Cora performs for the first time. It's brilliant. And then in the crowd, she sees her rapist with the woman who used to be her best friend, but obviously now can't remember her at all. And she follows them around, and she sees that he's not changed at all. He's still physically abusive, just this time to her friend Emma. And he tries to sexually assault Emma in the middle of the park. A little unbelievable, but I understand why they put this scene in, and yeah. They needed to get Cora angry enough to make her act and protect her friend and show that she would kill in the right circumstances. So while it's unbelievable for the real world, I get why the author did it, even if it is a little heavy-handed. Spoilers, of course. Cora manages to save her friend before she is actually raped, and she basically sucks out and eats most of Duncan's soul, but leaves him just enough that he's alive, but he's like a shell of his former self, and he's crazy, he's insane, he can't remember anything about himself. Basically, they say that she murdered him because he might as well be dead at this point. And then the book ends with her feeling super, super empowered and saying she'll kill Ringmaster, and then Simon whispers that he loves her while she's asleep, but she doesn't hear it. But call me a cynic, but I don't believe him. It's clearly a mix of like lust and him being happy that she's finally giving him what he wants, but then that's it. Yeah, end of the book. Now, I do quickly want to talk about the parallels between the scene in which Duncan abuses and attempts to rape Emma and everything that Simon has done to Cora. Now, some of this is going to be quite graphic, and I don't necessarily want to, but I think I do have to read some of these bits out to show you the similarities, so this may be hard for some people to listen to. I get if you want to skip on to the next bit, this is fine. There are identical actions and behaviours between the two couples, but in this book, when Duncan does it, it's called abuse and it's shamed. But when Simon does it, it's treated differently, and I don't know why. I don't understand the twisted logic in this author's brain where she can justify any of this. It doesn't make sense, and it's a dangerous thing to be portraying to an audience. 100 feet later, and Duncan tugged Emily aside and off the main path. Cora furrowed her brow. Emily shook her head, laughed nervously, and tried to pull away from him, but Duncan was having none of it. He tugged her harder, and she stammered as he yanked her between two of the game stalls. Does this not just remind everyone of all those times Cora has said no to Simon, and he still bound her with his strings and pulled her around, and was also having none of it? It's identical. Duncan had Emily up against the wall. He had her pinned by her shoulders, and he was roughly kissing her. She was pushing against him, trying to get free. Just like the scene in which Cora tried to yank back from Simon, but his hand in her hair tightened into a fist. She pushed against his chest, but she might as well have been shoving against a wall. When she tried to rip away from him, he gestured a hand, and suddenly she couldn't move. He had her in his strings. Identical. You'll like it. You know you do. Duncan grabbed Emily between her legs. Emily whimpered and shook her head. Please, not here, not right now. No, it's gonna be here, it's gonna be now, and you're gonna like it. So you mean like when Simon snuck into Cora's trailer and kissed her, forced her legs open, pinned her down, and tried to have sex with her while she was unconscious, and when she woke up and tried to push him off, I quote, he chuckled. Oh no, he wasn't going to take some false show of dignity seriously. He heard her, she wanted him just as much as he wanted her. Duncan turned her around, smashing her against the wall face first. He ripped off her coat, and that was when Cora saw the bruises on her arms. Oh, what's that? Bruises are now bad? Are we forgetting the bit from the last book where Simon grabbed Cora's arms and wrists, and she was glad she healed quickly now? She'd have a bruise otherwise. The bruises weren't bad there, but it is when Duncan does it. Every bit of behaviour that Duncan displays is exactly what Simon has displayed, and more. There's a double standard here that makes no sense, and it's disgusting. Both of these men are abusers. One isn't better than the other, no matter how much the author tries to pretend one is. It's disgusting. But anyway, that's the end of book 4, and I think we should swiftly move on to book 5, the final book, which is just simply titled The Fair. Okay, and that is this book done. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for all your support, for your time, for your effort being here today. I appreciate that these are not easy topics to talk about. It's not easy to hear, it's not easy to speak about, it's not easy to sit here and edit and go through it all. So I appreciate all of you who are sticking around throughout all this, and hopefully learning something and feeling heard or spoken to or anything along the way. My brain's really not working at the minute. But if you did enjoy this video or you found it interesting, it would be great if you want to leave a comment down below. Please subscribe if you're new here. Also, if you aren't new here, check you're still subscribed, please. Ever since YouTube removed one of my pro-mask videos for misinformation because it thought it was anti-mask and it wasn't, and I kind of kicked up a fuss about it and told them they were wrong, and it was like a whole thing. YouTube have kind of been reducing the number of new people who see my videos on my channel, so it's been a little bit difficult to grow over this last month or so. So it'd be really great if you subscribe if you're new. If you're not, maybe give the video a share on social media for me, something like that. Leave comments and likes, because all that engagement really helps. And yeah, I appreciate the support a hell of a lot, and the patience, and for you all sticking around. I think you're wonderful. And yeah, I think that's this done for today. Don't forget to stick around for the next videos in this series or video or whatever. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you. I'll see you again soon.